I began as nothing special, a square of white cotton, neatly folded and tucked into the breast pocket of Reverend Samuel Kyles. The Memphis spring air of April 1968 carried a peculiar weight as I rested against his heart. I had been with him through many speeches, many prayers, many moments of both celebration and sorrow. His fingers would occasionally reach for me when emotion overtook him during a particularly moving sermon. But nothing would prepare me for what was to come. That morning, Reverend Kyles had carefully pressed me flat, folded me precisely, and positioned me in his pocket with unusual attention. "Today is important," he whispered, though not to me directly. I could feel the quickened rhythm of his heart beneath the fabric that separated us. There was anticipation in the air. Dr. King was in Memphis to support the sanitation workers' strike, fighting for dignity in the face of systemic injustice. I had glimpsed Dr. King before, of course. His resonant voice had vibrated through me during previous gatherings, his words so powerful they seemed to physically move the very fibers of my being. But today, April 4th, felt different. There was a heaviness that clung to the Memphis air, a tension that seemed to stretch the very fabric of time itself. Through the day, I absorbed the scent of coffee during morning meetings, felt the subtle moisture of Reverend Kyles's perspiration as tensions ran high in strategy sessions. I was there, silently witnessing history unfold from my humble vantage point. The Lorraine Motel hummed with activity, phone calls, visitors, the constant movement of a movement that refused to be still. As evening approached, I felt Reverend Kyles' pace quicken as he walked the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. Room 306 had become the center of a universe in motion. Dr. King had been in good spirits, despite the bomb threat that had delayed his flight to Memphis the day before. The litigation against the city for prohibiting the planned march was moving forward. There was progress, however incremental, and with it, hope. I remember the gentle knock at Dr. King's door around 6 p.m., Reverend Kyles inviting him to dinner. The cool evening air as they stepped onto the balcony, the light-hearted comments about needing a coat for the chilly spring evening, the mundane, beautiful humanity of the moment. A group of friends about to share a meal, discussing the struggles and triumphs of their day. None of us knew that within moments, everything would change. None of us knew that I would soon be soaked, not with the perspiration of anxiety or the tears of joy, but with the profound grief of a dream deferred. At precisely 6:01 p.m., April 4th, 1968, time shattered. The crack of a rifle shot from across Mulberry Street tore through the gentle evening air. I felt Reverend Kyles lurch forward, a reflex of shock and disbelief. In an instant, Dr. King lay sprawled on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, blood pooling beneath his head. "Martin!" The cry tore from Reverend Kyles's throat as he rushed toward his fallen friend. His hands trembled as they reached for me, pulling me from his pocket with desperate urgency. Around us, chaos erupted, shouts from below, the thundering of footsteps up the stairs, the wail of Ralph Abernathy as he emerged from his room to find his dearest friend lying motionless. I was pressed against Dr. King's wound, my white fibers instantly stained crimson. In that moment, I became more than fabric. I became a vessel of history, absorbing the literal lifeblood of a man who had changed America forever. The warmth of his blood pulsed weakly at first, then slowed. Through me, Reverend Kyles felt the fading heartbeat of the dream. "Oh God, not Martin," someone sobbed. Hands reached for towels, for anything to stop the bleeding, but I remained there, clutched in Reverend Kyles's shaking hand. I felt his tears fall upon me as he knelt beside his friend, adding their salt to the iron of blood. His fingers wrung, me in anguish, twisting the very fibers of my being as if physical pain might somehow wake him from this nightmare. People crowded the balcony now, hotel staff, other civil rights leaders, ordinary people drawn by the sound that had forever altered the course of history. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, freezing the horror in stark black and white for tomorrow's newspapers. Through it all, I remained clutched in Reverend Kyle's hand, a small square of cotton bearing witness to an unspeakable tragedy. The ambulance arrived with its wailing siren, cutting through the cacophony of grief and shock. As they lifted Dr. King onto the stretcher, Reverend Kyles stepped back, still clutching me in his fist. I was no longer white, but red and wet, my original purpose transformed. No longer was I merely an accessory or a practical object. I had become an artifact of one of America's darkest moments, an unwilling repository of collective trauma. In the still moments after they took him away, as Reverend Kyles stood frozen on that balcony, I absorbed not just blood and tears, but the weight of a movement suddenly without its moral center, a people without their Moses, a nation that would soon erupt in anguish and flames. The hours following Dr. King's shooting passed in a blur of sirens, tears, and desperate prayers. Reverend Kyles, still clutching me in his trembling hand, was driven to St. Joseph's Hospital. The corridors echoed with hurried footsteps and hushed voices. I remained folded in his palm, damp with mingled blood and tears, as he paced the waiting room floor. At 7:05 p.m., the announcement came. Martin Luther King Jr. had been pronounced dead. I felt Reverend Kyles' knees buckle as he collapsed into a chair. His fingers unconsciously twisted me tighter, wringing out the moisture that had soaked into my fibers. Around us, grown men wept openly. Coretta Scott King was on her way from Atlanta, not yet knowing she was coming to claim her husband's body rather than visit him in recovery. That night, as news spread across America, I remained with Reverend Kyles. He couldn't bring himself to discard me, this small piece of cotton that had touched Dr. King in his final moments. Instead, he carefully folded me, still stained, and placed me in an envelope when he returned to his room. Outside, Memphis began to simmer with tension. By morning, the city would be under curfew, with National Guard troops patrolling the streets. April 5th dawned with smoke rising from dozens of American cities. From inside that envelope, I could sense the tremors of a nation convulsing in grief and rage. Washington, D.C., Chicago, Baltimore, Kansas City, more than 100 cities across America erupted in flames as the news of Dr. King's assassination spread. The very fabric of American society seemed to be tearing at the seams. Through the following days, I traveled with Reverend Kyles from Memphis to Atlanta for the funeral. On April 9th, I was in his pocket again as he joined the procession of 100,000 people who followed Dr. King's casket through the streets of Atlanta. The sound of "We Shall Overcome" rose from countless throats, its melody carrying both defiance and despair. From my place close to Reverend Kyles' heart, I felt every sob that shook his body during the funeral service at Ebenezer Baptist Church. I absorbed the vibrations of Mahalia Jackson's voice as she sang "Take My Hand, Precious Lord," the song Dr. King had requested just moments before stepping onto that balcony. I witnessed history not from the grand perspective of textbooks and documentaries, but from the intimate vantage point of personal grief. In those days, I became more than an object. I was transformed into a relic, a small, silent witness to both the brutal ending of a life and the unyielding persistence of a movement that refused to die with its leader. My stains faded slightly with time, but never disappeared entirely, much like the wound inflicted on America that April evening. 57 years have passed since that April evening in Memphis. My fibers have grown fragile with age, my once crisp edges now softened by time. The stains have darkened to a rusty brown, barely recognizable as the vital fluid they once were. For decades, I rested in Reverend Kyles' personal effects, carefully preserved in that same envelope, taken out occasionally when he needed to remind himself of the reality of what he had witnessed. Before his passing in 2015, Reverend Kyles donated me to the National Civil Rights Museum, now housed in the very Lorraine Motel where tragedy struck. I rest in a climate-controlled display case, a small square of fabric that holds more history than my humble origins could have ever predicted. Thousands of visitors pass by me each year, many pausing to read my story, some wiping away tears as they connect with the human reality of a moment often reduced to a date in history books. Children press their faces close to my display, their breath fogging the glass as they struggle to comprehend how something so ordinary could have witnessed something so extraordinary. School groups stand before me, while tour guides explain the significance of April 4th, 1968, how a single bullet fired at a single man sent shockwaves through a nation still struggling to fulfill its promise of equality. From my quiet place, I have witnessed America's continued journey. I was here when Barack Obama was elected president, when Black Lives Matter marches filled the streets, when George Floyd's death sparked a new generation of protest. I have seen how Dr. King's dream has both advanced and stalled, how his words have been both honored and commodified. What visitors don't always understand is that I hold more than just the memory of death. I hold the memory of the man himself, not just the icon on posters or the voice in famous speeches, but the human being who laughed on that balcony moments before tragedy struck, who spoke of going to dinner, who worried about the cool evening air. I remember Martin Luther King Jr., not just as a martyr, but as a man with hopes and fears, strengths and frailties. On quiet nights, when the museum is empty and only the security lights illuminate my display, I sometimes imagine I can still hear his voice echoing through the halls, not the famous "I have a dream" cadence, but his casual everyday speech. The voice of a 39-year-old man who didn't know he was living his last day, who had plans for tomorrow, who expected to see his children grow up. This is what objects like me preserve, not just the grand sweep of history, but its intimate moments. We carry the weight of what humans cannot always bear to remember, holding space for both the tragedy of what was lost and the enduring hope of what might still be possible. In my humble threads lies a testament not just to how Martin Luther King Jr. died, but to how his dream continues to live. For dreams, unlike men, cannot be killed with bullets. They are carried forward in the hearts and hands of those who refuse to surrender to hatred and fear. They persist in the small, everyday acts of courage and compassion that slowly bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. And sometimes, they are preserved in the silent witness of objects like me, ordinary things transformed by extraordinary moments into keepers of our collective memory.